In this video, I'm going to walk you through the rise of ancient Rome and then break down what I think were the three biggest pillars of its eventual collapse. The Roman Empire, man. This is one of those topics that just never leaves my brain. Like, I'll be brushing my teeth at night and suddenly, boom, thinking about Roman legions again. Now, maybe you think you know how Rome rose and fell. You probably learned bits in school, maybe saw a documentary or two. But I'm willing to bet there are holes in your knowledge. Big holes. And today, my goal is to fill those holes. Yes, your holes. So let's start at the beginning. Rome wasn't always this gigantic empire running half the world. Around 753 BC, it was basically an asylum city, a sketchy little pit stop wedged between the Etruscans up north and the Greeks down south. And when I say asylum city, I mean it was literally a hangout spot for thieves, runaway slaves, criminals, and outcasts. If you had nowhere to go, you went to Rome. Imagine if New York, Vegas, and a pirate ship had a baby. That was early Rome. This open-door policy was actually one of Rome's secret weapons. Instead of being a closed-off little kingdom, Rome welcomed everyone. That flood of outsiders and misfits gave them numbers, ideas, and eventually, power. But here's the kicker. A lot of what we think of as Roman innovation wasn't even originally Roman. They borrowed heavily from their neighbors, especially the Etruscans. Things like their alphabet, gladiator games, even parts of their political structure. Rome was like that kid in school who copies your homework but somehow gets all the credit. From 753 BC to 509 BC, Rome was ruled by 7 kings. But by the time the last king got kicked out, mostly for being shady and doing some highly questionable king stuff, the Romans decided, yeah, no more kings. That's enough monarchy for us. They didn't want one guy holding all the power, so they came up with a new system. Instead of one king, they had 2 elected officials who each ruled for 1 year. Which, if you think about it, is hilarious. Like, who decided it was a good idea to let 2 politicians with the lifespan of a butterfly run things? Below them was a senate of 300 patricians, rich dudes from the right families, who basically pulled the strings. And then, below all that, you had the plebs, normal citizens who had no political say whatsoever. Same people, just not born into the right bloodline. Naturally, the plebs weren't thrilled about being treated like background characters in their own city. Over 2 centuries, they fought, sometimes literally, for more rights. Since plebs made up most of the Roman army, they had leverage. If they didn't get what they wanted, they'd threaten to leave and fight for someone else. And the Senate, terrified of losing their muscle, would eventually cave. So the Republic was born, but it wasn't smooth sailing. In 390 BC, Rome got absolutely wrecked by a surprise attack from invading Gauls. The city was nearly wiped off the map. This spooked the Romans so badly they reformed their entire military. Instead of fighting in one giant block, they broke the army down into smaller, flexible units called maniples. That gave them mobility, discipline, and a tactical edge. And from then on, Rome became a machine of expansion. Here's the genius move. When Rome conquered a new place, they didn't just burn it to the ground. They offered treaties of alliance. They'd say, "Congrats, you're part of Rome now. Send us soldiers, pay your taxes, and we'll protect you." That meant every victory gave Rome more soldiers for the next war. It was like recruiting your enemies to become your future army. Absolute big brain move. By 133 BC, though, cracks started to show. The wealth gap exploded, and the poor had basically nothing to lose anymore. The Senate and the common people were no longer in sync. A few brave souls tried to propose reforms like free bread or public land for the poor, but the Senate's answer to that was, yeah, no, we'll just kill you instead. Politics, Roman style. And right around this time enters one of the most famous names in history, Julius Caesar. His chapter in Rome's story is surprisingly short compared to the hype. He rose to power during civil wars, crushed rival generals, and even hooked up with Cleopatra, literally installing her on the Egyptian throne. History crossover episode unlocked. Back in Rome, Caesar gave himself the title of imperator, meaning victorious commander, and basically made himself dictator for life. The Senate wasn't cool with that. They looked at him and said, "Yeah, this guy is way too powerful." And so, knives came out. Caesar was assassinated, stabbed to death by his so-called friends. 4 years of power, and that was it. After Caesar, his 19-year-old nephew, Octavian, later Augustus, took over. Unlike his uncle, Augustus managed to play it smart. He didn't officially abolish the Republic, but he didn't really give up power either. He called himself First Senator, which sounds humble but basically meant, "I control everything, don't test me." He ruled for 43 years, bringing stability, bread for the poor, gladiator shows, and early urban modernization. After Augustus, Rome went through a roller coaster of rulers. Some good, some so bad they make modern politicians look like saints. Eventually, Rome hit its good emperor era, the last of which was Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king himself. He spent his reign fighting wars and, in his downtime, writing Meditations, a book that still sells today. Stoic wisdom straight from the battlefield. Highly recommend giving it a read if you want to feel smarter in coffee shops. But when Marcus died in 180 AD, the good times ended. His son Commodus took over, and the whole thing started crumbling. Eventually, the empire got so big it split into 4 parts, then briefly reunited, then split again permanently in 395 AD into East and West. The East, Byzantine Empire, kept going for another 1,000 years. The West? Yeah, not so lucky. So now that you know the backstory, let's talk about why Rome actually fell. Because it wasn't just one bad day, it was death by 1,000 cuts. In my opinion, there were 3 main pillars that brought the empire down: corruption and mismanagement, religious conflict, and outside invasions. First up, corruption and mismanagement. If you think modern governments are a mess, Rome makes them look like a kid's lemonade stand. They went from kings to republic to empire, and along the way cycled through more rulers than most people go through socks. Some rulers were good, but plenty were incompetent, insane, or both. Take Commodus, for example. Dude became emperor at 15 years old and ruled for 15 years. He fancied himself part emperor, part gladiator. Imagine if your teenage cousin who's obsessed with Fortnite got control of the world's largest empire. That was Commodus. Rome somehow survived, mostly because the system was so well built it could run itself for a while. But the little cracks kept spreading. After Commodus, 193 AD became known as the Year of the 5 Emperors. That's right, 5 emperors in 1 year. One was assassinated in 3 months. Another literally bought the empire like it was on eBay and was killed after 3 weeks. Morale was in the gutter. Local provinces started acting like mini-countries, developing their own identities and pulling away. This whole situation actually reminds me of a restaurant job I had once. The staff all knew how to do the job. Everything ran fine. But every few months, a new manager would show up convinced they knew better. They'd mess everything up, nobody respected them, and the place went downhill. Rome was that restaurant, just on a massive bloody scale. Second pillar, religious conflict. Rome started out worshipping their traditional pantheon, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, the whole squad. But then Christianity showed up. At first, it was treated like an offshoot of Judaism, which Rome already wasn't a fan of. New religions were seen as a threat to Roman unity. Persecutions, executions, and public torture of Christians became common. But the thing about persecution is, it can backfire. Instead of crushing Christianity, it made it stronger. Eventually, Christianity spread so widely that the empire itself converted. The church gained enormous power, even as parts of the population resisted. Was Christianity alone the reason Rome fell? Probably not, but it definitely poured fuel on the fire. When your empire is already divided politically and economically, Adding a giant religious shift on top just makes everything shakier. And finally, Pillar 3. Outside opposition. This one was the nail in the coffin. Rome could have limped along with corruption and religious infighting, but outside pressure broke them. The most famous were the Huns, a nomadic people who basically left a trail of nightmares everywhere they went. Their invasions pushed waves of refugees into Roman territory. Now, early Rome thrived on refugees. That's how they started. But by this point, Rome wasn't welcoming. These new arrivals were often treated as second class at best, forced into labor or left in limbo. They weren't accepted into the army like before, and that was a huge mistake. Many of these groups eventually turned on Rome from within. By the time the empire officially split into East and West, the western half was weakened, underfunded, and stretched thin. Refugee groups, barbarians, and invading tribes chipped away at the borders, until finally, in 476 AD, a barbarian king delivered the finishing blow. The Western Roman Empire was done. The East lived on as the Byzantine Empire, and Christianity became the dominant force in Europe for the next 1,000 years. But Rome's fall still stands as one of the most fascinating examples of how even the strongest empires can crumble. In the end, Rome had too much land, too little money, too much chaos, and not enough progress. It's a reminder that no matter how mighty a civilization looks, it can still collapse from within. And hey, just so we're clear, this is a bro history lesson, not a cheat sheet for your school essay. If you copy this word for word into an assignment, don't blame me when your teacher catches on.